Hi everyone, it's Kelly here and welcome if this is your first time visiting my channel. Welcome back if you've been before. Lovely to have you either way. On this channel we talk books and today I am wrapping up my February. Now traditionally February is not a good reading month for me because I go back to work, things get busy for sort of like a period as I've just started back at work, and then I sort of get back into my rhythm of things in March. However, I feel like I may have overcompensated for this because I ended up reading quite a few books in February. So I was obviously trying really, really hard. My January wasn't as productive as it normally is. So often I read quite a lot of books in January, and I only read 4, which is, sorry, I say only read. That's absolutely keeping to where I would like to be at a book a week. So yeah, I guess because I didn't have as good a January as I often do, that might have also added to like how I was feeling about February, and therefore I read more books, which is good. I've gone a little bit further in my reading sort of plans than I had thought was going to happen. So I'm really, really pleased with that. So let me tell you about the books that I've read this month. I read some quite good books, and then I read some other books that were just so-so, but I'll tell you all about them. The first book that I read is this one, and this was a reread for me. It's a poetry collection called Teaching My Mother How to Give Birth by Warsan, Shire. And this is very, very short. So it was not a huge read. Let me see how many pages it is. 34 pages. So this didn't take me very long at all. I read it in one sitting. But it's a really powerful short poetry collection about being a female refugee coming from a place where violence is the norm. And it has some really gut-wrenching sort of lines in it, things that like really make you think about stuff. For example, no one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. Like, honestly, this is definitely a book that you should read if that's something that if you're ready to have your mind blown by some poetry. I loved it. It was great. Still 5 stars. No questions. The next book that I read was a non-fiction book. So this is, I think, the first book. Yeah, I read 2 books this month that will be going on to my challenge, my 2023 Dewey Decimal Reading Challenge, where we're reading non-fiction books from each of the broad classes of the Dewey Decimal System. I'll link the challenge in the description below if you want to join us. It's not too late. Anyway, this is Nothing Bad Ever Happens Here by Heather Rose, a memoir of loss and discovery. I've read 2 books by Heather Rose in the past. I've read The Museum of Modern Love, which is another of my 5-star books. I loved that book. And then I've also read Bruni. I didn't love Bruni as much, but it was still pretty decent. And this is non-fiction writing, obviously. So this is her talking about her life. And there are things I did not know about Heather Rose. Not that I knew much about Heather Rose other than that she's an author of 2 books that I have read. But she has been through some stuff. So it was a really, really good read. I ended up giving it 4 stars, and I have a newfound respect for Heather Rose. This book is talking a lot about loss and grief, about relationships, about motherhood, chronic pain, spirituality, and finding joy. And I highly recommend it. I really enjoyed this book. The next book that I read was a fiction, and it is Sunbathing by Isobel Beech. As you can see, I've tabbed a few interesting things there because I wanted to kind of keep a record of those thoughts. Beautiful writing, again about grief and the impact of suicide on those who are left behind. So there was one scene in, so the only reason I didn't give this 5 stars because I really enjoyed it. So it's a 4-star read for me. And the only reason I didn't give it 5 is because there was, I don't know why it bothered me so much. There's recreational drug use in this book, and there was a particular scene where that happened, that just felt really superfluous to me. Like it didn't need to be there at all. It wasn't necessary to the plot, and it really pulled me out of the narrative. I guess because she's sort of talking about it really uncritically, which is, it's a novel, it's fine, but it just seemed really unnecessary. And it disappointed me for some reason. I also will say, so it's set in two places. So it's set in Melbourne, and then it's set in Italy, like in the Italian countryside. And those Italian parts were really, really evocative of place and, you know, sort of made you kind of want to be there. The Melbourne parts were not as evocative, so they were much more kind of plot based, and which is fine, again, fine, but it just wasn't for me as much as the Italian parts were. So yeah, this is basically about a woman whose father commits suicide, and she is grieving, obviously, and is finding it really hard to kind of move forward. Her friend is getting married in Italy, which is where her friend lives. And so she goes over to Italy and spends like a month there with her friend and her friend's partner, and in the lead up to the wedding. And it's sort of like this kind of healing journey for her. I will say on the back, it talks about the fact that she is staying in the house's birthing room where generations of women once had their babies. And the way that it's talked about on the back made me think that that was going to be a lot more of the plot as well. And it really wasn't. Like, it was mentioned as like an interesting thing, but then it wasn't, that thematically didn't link, I don't think, to the book itself and like what was going on in the book. So I was a bit disappointed by that as well. So a couple of tiny little things that just kind of didn't quite work for me, as well as other parts of the book. But this is a debut from Isobel Beech, and I absolutely will be interested to have a look at anything else that she subsequently writes, because this was really, really beautiful, and highly recommended if you can kind of look past those other little things that didn't work quite as well. But yeah, really good book. Then I started this one in December, I want to say, and it took me a little while to get through it. It's Playing Beady Bow by Ruth Park. I've given this one 3 stars. So this is I would say, is it middle grade? It's kind of like on the cusp of middle grade, moving perhaps like an older middle grade, if that makes sense. So we've got Abigail is our main character, and she is a sort of youngish teenager, like 14, 15 maybe. And she does a bit of babysitting for her neighbours in the flats. We find out that her mum and dad are separated or divorced. I'm not sure, I can't remember. And she's kind of dealing with some stuff from that, like some feelings towards her dad, who had an affair and went off with another person. So she's sort of dealing with some stuff from that. She's kind of like she likes to kind of play around with fashion and stuff, and so she's like utilizing these kind of old-fashioned bits and bobs, and she's kind of dressing a little bit like in the Victorian era style, kind of, but her own version of it. Anyway, she's an evocative kind of character, I think, and I think a well-written teenager, in my kind of like memory of what it was like to be a teenager and trying to find your place in the world and dealing with big feelings and stuff like that. So in that sense, good book. Then she is a little bit insufferable, I will say. But what happens is, while she's babysitting her neighbors, she ends up going to the park with them, and they're playing this game that they call Beady Bow, and they see this little girl sort of watching on, who kind of looks a bit weird, and she definitely doesn't want to be approached, and she's just watching. And Abigail, on another occasion, sees this little girl again and follows her. This is when she's not babysitting, follows her and gets sucked into the past, basically. So she travels through time back into the past, and it's set in the rocks in Sydney, which is sort of like right near the harbour. So it's sort of like, the reason that this is an interesting book is because it's kind of looking at what life was like at the time when the colony was a bit more established in Sydney. And so you're kind of like learning about what life was like for people living in the city in that time in the rocks. And so that bit of it is really, really interesting. Beady is also a really good character. So she is Beady of the game Beady Bow. And so she's been drawn to, like, through time to watch these children playing it because she heard her name. And so she's kind of like watching these kids playing a game, and she's like, why do people know my name? That's so weird. And anyway, so Abigail gets brought back in time with Beady. So Beady and Abigail know about it. No one else knows that that's the case. And luckily she's wearing her like faux Victorian clothes so that she kind of looks the part. But yeah, the only thing that really kind of messed with me a little bit was the ending of this book. It's kind of icky. But yeah, if you can look past the ickiness of the ending and the insufferableness of Abigail, the exploration of the rocks area, especially if you're from Sydney and it's an area that you have been to or go to, it's worthwhile reading it for that. And it's also an Australian classic, so I'm glad that I read it. This is actually a reread for me, but yeah, I'm glad that I reread it. And I knew that ending was coming. I'd forgotten specifically what it was, but I just remembered it being icky, and then it came and I was like, oh yeah, that's right, it is icky, it's gross. So yeah, anyway, Playing Beady Bow by Ruth Park. All right, so then I read a really, really cute book, which is the first time I've ever read a manga. And this one is called, I bought this for my husband and then I proceeded to read it, Cat Massage Therapy. This is the first one in the series. It's by Haru Hisakawa, and it's super cute. That's all I could really say about it. Essentially, this cat runs a massage parlor, and it's kind of like it massages humans, and like cute things happen, cat things happen. So especially if you're a cat person, this would be for you for sure. It's really cute. And it's not the best thing I've ever read. It was a 3-star read for me. It wasn't like groundbreaking or anything like that, but it is super cute. So I recommend. It's cute. The next book that I read is The Ninth Life of a Diamond Miner by Grace Tame. The call number for this book is 362.883092. It's a big, long one. So this is the second book that I've read this month that will go towards a prompt. So this is the 300s for me. I have some feelings and some thoughts about this book. But I want to preface them by saying I think that Grace Tame is a good person and someone whose career I will continue to follow, and someone who I continue to have a lot of respect for what she's been through and what she is doing with that, the traumas of her past, and how she's kind of moving forward with them. She's also an advocate for women with autism because she is a woman with autism. So yeah, I have a lot of respect for her. I think she's a great person. This book wasn't it for me, unfortunately. So I've given it 2.5 stars. The bits about this book that were good and interesting were really good. And then there were some parts of this book that felt like a massive edit was needed. Maybe even a ghostwriter to sort of help her to kind of, because she's not known for being a writer. She's known for her public speaking and for her advocacy work, working in the space of child sexual assault and also for her advocacy with autism, and especially autism in women. So unfortunately, the book didn't work for me. She does these character profiles on it seems like it's every person she's ever met in her life, and which I think really detracts from the power of her main messages in the book. And to be honest, I think even the 2.5 star rating was generous. I really didn't enjoy this book at all. Not enjoy is the wrong word. This didn't work for me as a book. But I guess because of who she is, I bumped it up to at least a pass mark of 2.5 stars. I was very tempted to DNF this book, but I stuck it out. So yeah, unfortunately, it didn't really work for me as a book, but I don't think that detracts from Grace Tame as a speaker, Grace Tame as an advocate. Just the writing did not work for me. So I will not be looking into any future writing that she does, unfortunately. So that was that one. And then the last book that I read for this month was a book club book, and it's Wahala by Nikki May. So I joined a new book club, and this was the first book that I read with the book club. I quite enjoyed this. I gave it 3.75 stars. It was a real roller coaster, and at the end I could not put it down because I just needed to know how it resolved, and like how things kind of unfolded for the characters. A thing that bothered me in this book was that there was like frequent messaging around and mentions of being fat, diet culture, exercising in a like, not in a way that was just kind of talking about I'm going for a run. It was like talking about it in an unhealthy way, I felt. Like it's a requirement so that you can be a particular way. Like some of the women in this book were very focused on their appearance and their how they kind of appeared to the world. And so those bits really, every single time that came up, it kind of pulled me out of the story, unfortunately, because it was a really interesting story and the characters were really interesting characters. So I enjoyed this book. Otherwise, it was very enjoyable, but it kept happening throughout the book where somebody would talk about somebody being fat, or they would like, they would be obsessed with their own, appearance and their weight and their, that sort of thing. So it just really bothered me as I was going through the books. Otherwise, this would have been a higher rating for sure, because it was a really good book and I really enjoyed it. So I would still recommend it, but just be aware that that's in there, and try and kind of like move past it. But essentially, I will tell you a little bit about this book. This book is about 3 women who have been friends for some years, and a 4th woman kind of joins their group. She's a childhood friend of one of the 3 women, and she's trouble. Wahala is a word that means trouble. This is a book. So all of these characters have a Nigerian background, but they have like one Nigerian parent and one white parent. So they are, and they all live in London. So some of them, they have different kind of like background stories of like how they came to be in London. But this friend was a friend of one of the characters when she was still living in Nigeria. And so she kind of comes into their lives and basically wreaks havoc on their relationships, their friendship, their lives, like the choices that they're making as humans. There's one character in here who is like likable throughout the whole thing. The other 2 of the friends are like, you go through periods of really disliking them. They're not necessarily the most likable characters, but not in a way that is, detracts from the story, because that does happen sometimes where you've got like a character that's so unlikable that you just can't get into the story. That's not the case here. I got into the story, but I really did not like some of the choices that these characters were making and the way that they were speaking about each other. and their partners and things like that. So yeah, that was, yeah. So yeah, really, really good book, Wahala by Nikki May. And I did love it, but I really could have done without all of those references to like diet culture and being fat, because that kind of ruined things a little bit for me, unfortunately. But yeah, otherwise, great book. So that's it. That is my February. Let me grab all the books to show them to you one more time. So yeah, quite a few books this month. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 books, which is impressive for February for me, because I genuinely thought, like, there have been months where I've read 1 book in February. So yeah, I've been really pleased to have made this much progress with my reading this month, and to be able to show you so many books as well, and to be able to talk to you about them. So I'm looking forward to March. I've got some reading plans and things that I'm looking forward to in March. So I am going to enjoy talking to you when I come to do my March wrap up. But that won't be the next video. The next video is going to be a massive book haul. I've already filmed it, and it's will take a little bit of time to edit, I think, but otherwise that will be my next video. So I will see you on that one, and until then, bye.